Hello and welcome to the latest Science of Sport podcast. I'm your host Matt Solomon, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Aimee O'Keefe and James Morehen. So Aimee has spent over 5 years working in professional sport. 4 of those were with Manchester United women's football team, and she currently works with the England Red Roses and the Williams F1 team. James is a performance nutritionist who works with the England men's rugby team and the Bristol Bears, as well as some professional boxers, including Chris Billam-Smith. So, who better today to discuss how you can improve your nutrition than these guys? So, without further ado, it's time to welcome them onto the show. So, James and Aimee, welcome to the Science of Sport podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Hello.
Good afternoon. Hello.
Thank you very much for joining us. So, can you give us a quick introduction as to who you are and what you've been up to? And Aimee, let's kick off with you first.
So, my name's Aimee O'Keefe, and I previously worked for Manchester United women's team, where I kind of started my practitioner career in football, in female football, and I now work in the big bad world of rugby with England Red Roses, so transitioned to a different team sport, albeit still females. And yeah, the complexities around fueling females continues. But yeah, I've worked in elite sport now for the past 4.5 years. So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Absolutely excellent. James, I mean, you've been knocking around on the podcast a few times before, but for those who haven't listened and don't know who you are, can you give us a quick rundown of what you're up to?
Yeah, so currently working with England Rugby senior men's team, so the performance nutritionist there, in a sport that I absolutely love, and alongside that do Bristol Bears Rugby Union in the Premiership, and then supporting a handful of kind of professional athletes or weekend warriors from boxers, motorsport, ultra endurance guys, and then run my own business, Performance Nutrition Network, and enjoy kind of loads of random projects that come with it. So previous background of undergrad, master's, PhD at Liverpool John Moores University, where Aimee and I know each other from, and then the PhD in rugby league before getting over to England football, the FA, for 4 years at St George's Park, and then getting myself back into the rugby union, which is where I am at now.
Absolutely excellent. We're obviously here to discuss nutrition, but specifically for female athletes in football. So before we get into all of the good stuff, obviously this stems from potentially the lack of information on the subject and the need for specific information on the subject. So before we get into the nutrition stuff, can you guys talk us through the differences between males and females when it comes to physiology? And then we'll come on to just in a second how that relates to nutrition. So Aimee, can you kick us off with the big things that you think are different between men and women when it comes to physiological aspects of sport?
Yeah, I think the first thing that springs to mind is the fact that females have a menstrual cycle and kind of the hormonal fluctuations and emotions that can come alongside that on a week to week, month to month basis. So yeah, there's kind of that angle, and how there's not enough research right now to be like, you need to eat this type of food around a certain phase of your cycle. But I think it's just always good to be aware and just understand that every athlete is different, every female athlete's different. So I guess that's kind of the biggest difference between males and females, is that the menstrual cycle and what can come along with that, whether that's potential increases in appetite cravings for some females, or it could be also increased risk of injury potentially. I know there's a lot in the media and on socials around ACL injuries and how it's linked to cycles, but I think we just need to be very, very careful on the messaging around that, and what we're kind of educating people about when it comes to that, because it's easy to just associate one with the other and put them both together, and it can cause scarcity around female athletes. And I guess it's down to me and James to debunk some of those topics and issues, and that's exactly what we're kind of doing this project for.
Absolutely excellent. And James, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think just supporting what Aimee's saying, that look, both of us having studied at an academic institute, and just being aware of the literature that's out there, there is a big difference between the amount of studies and research, peer-reviewed research studies and papers published in male athletes versus female athletes, and then the nuances of female football players versus male football players. So as Aimee's addressed, like the fundamental physiology there of a female individual is different to a male individual, and how that then translates into things like metabolism changes or substrate utilization during pre and post exercise. Some of these that, we don't really know the answer fully yet, but a lot of that research is now starting to happen, which is great. And there's some superb researchers and academic institutes in the UK, Europe, across the world that are really starting to understand the female landscape a lot more and do these studies on female specific participants at the academic institutions. So it's an area that's going to grow massively over the next couple of years, and rightly it should.
And when it comes to things like physical outputs, for example, so like let's say you're on the pitch, are there differences in physical outputs between men and women, and do those then also influence the kind of nutrition advice that women might be getting compared to men?
Shall I start?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, look, the reality is that there's always going to be differences in physical outputs, even within the men's game. So, senior level to academy level to under 16 level. And then if you then transfer that over into the women's game, physical differences within match play is present, and that's just the reality of it. But then also when you look at physical outputs and speed and acceleration, deaccelerations, and total distance covered between academy players, either in academy setups or not, versus the adolescent player versus the senior player, then there's differences across all of that. And that's what we're starting to understand now is, in particular, how if there are differences across the board, then how does that nutritional strategy or how does that advice that we provide differ if there are differences across that? I mean, one of the things that stands out for me, and it always will stand out, is, although it is in male research, is Marcus Hannon's data looking at the energy expenditure, the energetic cost of football from under 11s or under 12s to under 15s, 16s, under 18s. And all these players played at the same Premier League academy setup, but they're at different ages of their career where they're experiencing different growth and maturation and peak velocity, and the spread in the data, like the intra variability within the data and also the inter-variability between the groups was massive. Some of these guys that are expending 4,500, 5,000 calories a day at under 16s, under 17s, and you're like, wow, that's huge. So then in the female game, where the research isn't quite as strong as that yet, it's almost a little bit of finger in the air. Like, we don't really know at the moment. And that's where all of this research moving forward is so important.
And Aimee, what does that then do with the recommendations that you guys are providing? So obviously it sounds difficult. It sounds like it's difficult to be purely research based, but there's some stuff to go on, of course. So yeah, how do you then start to advise these athletes with respect to the fact that they're female athletes in a sport which doesn't have that necessarily that strong body of evidence?
Yeah, and like James said before, it is a bit of let's use the men's kind of data and often transfer it over to the females, rightly or wrongly. But until we've got a bigger body of evidence to suggest that we need to go lower or higher, then we kind of play it safe, you could say, as recommending the same as the men, like that 6 grams per kilo day before a game, if we use that example. But then there's also the kind of complexities around that substrate utilization, and females don't need as much carbohydrate than in terms of loading than males, but again, there's not enough there to definitively say how much they do need then. So yeah, I think from my practice and my advice, I've always trialed it as building it up. I think maybe I've not worked in men's sport specifically, but what I have experienced with females is that 6 grams per kilo sometimes blows their mind until you show them what it can actually look like. And I think the volume of food with females a lot of the time can scare them. So what I found is just building it up. So it could be that 1 week it's 4 grams per kilo, 1 week it's 5, 1 week it's 6, and then just showing that like gradual step. And even in my own kind of practice with mostly endurance athletes, when, for example, a female Ironman athlete has to load for maybe 2 days, it's always been that gradual approach and just trialing it out and not giving them all of it at once, because often it does make their head fall off. And I think that volume of food in females is something that they're quite scared of sometimes. So if we can kind of sneak carbohydrates in different ways, and then usually it can take away that kind of like fear of, oh my God, I've got to eat so much. I'm going to feel so full. I'm going to get so fat.
What we're talking about there, and those are like valid concerns, right? Like, although it might not be true that in one day you're going to get fat, but the feeling that that's the case, that is something that needs to be dealt with, right?
Yeah.
But for those listening, what are we talking about when you're talking about 6 grams per kilo? Like, are we talking about 1,000 jacket potatoes? What's going on there?
Yeah, so it's kind of the terminology that's used in the kind of the literature. So 6 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of your body weight. So if I'm 60 kilos, times that by 6, 360 grams would be the thereabout recommendation for me to carbohydrate load, which would be classified as kind of being optimally fueled on the day before a game to fuel optimally for that game the following day. So in that 24-hour period before kickoff, that should be your carbohydrate loading day. And yeah, the recommendations are 6 grams per kilo, but there's research coming out now to show 8 grams, 9 grams, 10 grams. So yeah, I think if we just stick with 6 for now, because if we say 8 to a female, yeah, I don't think we're going to get much buy-in.
And when you put that on a plate, what are we talking about?
I guess it depends. I kind of look at it as like a timeline from like when you wake up to when you go to bed. So I think it is really important to understand what the meal frequencies are for that female athlete or male athlete. So if the typical is 3 meals and 2 snacks a day, or 2 or 3 snacks a day, but you might be working with a female who only has 2 meals and 1 snack or doesn't snack at all. So yeah, I think if you look at your standard timeline, it could be a couple of bagels for breakfast with banana and jam, for example. Lunch could be some kind of rice dish with a smoothie. Dinner could be a pasta dish, with a side of garlic bread. And then it's kind of like fitting in those other carbohydrate-based snacks in between. And you could finish it with like a bowl of cereal with milk. But yeah, I guess it would depend on how many times that person eats throughout the day. And then you can kind of fit the jigsaw together.
Absolutely excellent. And James, have you got anything to add to that in terms of how the physiology that we discussed can then influence the dietary requirements?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll just add straight away is so the listeners understand that 6 gram per kilo, and if Aimee's there presenting, a 60 kilo athlete, 360 grams of carbohydrates a day, we would. I mean, I normally would say to the guys or girls that a jacket potato is about 50 grams of carbs. So you're looking here in between 5, 6, 7, 8 jacket potatoes worth of carbohydrates in that 24-hour window. Like that's the fuel that we're after. But really getting across to the athletes and the players that if we're eating with intent the day before the game, carbohydrate should be high. Like that is the goal of the day before the game, the eat with intent, the carbohydrate periodization framework, fueling for the work required. It's a green day. It's go, go, go. Let's get the carbs so that we're ready for performance. And the one thing that we've all got to remember is that 1 gram of carbohydrate and 1 gram of protein are both 4 calories. And so your calorie content the day before the game is coming from the majority of your macronutrient of carbohydrate. But there's so many individuals that I work with that get really scared of over consuming carbohydrates and thinking, oh my God, well, am I having too many carbs on this day? And am I going to store fat, or what's going to happen if I don't burn it? And the reality is that we're eating with intent. The intent tomorrow is that we're going to play 90 minutes to the best of our ability and run the opposition into the ground. That's the intent. You cannot do that by putting 30 or 40% of your fuel into the petrol tank. You're just not going to be able to control and have the sustained energetic output that you want to do for 90 minutes. So I think once they understand that, then they go, oh, wow, so I can really enjoy carbohydrates the day before and know that there's a direct purpose as to why I'm consuming this. So I think that's a massive thing for listeners to understand. And then the other side of this, and this is what me and Aimee have seen both in practice, is, you know, speaking to Aimee about what she, you know, some of the athletes that she's worked with, and then my own experience of England football and the women's players at the international setup and the Lionesses, is that it's not necessarily their fault that they're not aware of how much they need to eat. Because if the education's never been given to you, then you're not going to know. It's like if you've never been taught how to speak French, like you're not going to know how to speak French. If you've never been educated or taught how to fuel properly, you're not going to know how to fuel properly. So that's what I saw at England football, was that we were having players at the international setup from under 15s to the senior team that were playing for England, but they didn't know how to fuel properly for the energetic cost of international football because they'd never been taught it. They'd never spoke to a nutritionist before. And that was a real eye-opener for me, because I was like, wow, we've got a great opportunity here to shift behaviours, shift strategies in the right direction. And when we went about doing the research at England football with the Lionesses, you know, we did a weighed food inventory live on camp. And what we identified was that we had one player at the international setup in the senior team that hit 6 grams per kilo, and the rest of our squad were hitting 3 or 4 grams per kilo. So effectively they were around 30 to 35% underfueled for international football games. And the clear message was, we're not ready to win a World Cup. Like, from a fueling point of view, it's simple. We all need to nudge and move that in a better direction, which comes back directly to what Aimee was saying, is if I've got a player that's consistently consuming 3 grams per kilo, to make her jump from 3 to 6 is quite a large jump overnight. So actually it's the encouragement to say, over the next couple of camps, can we go from 3 to maybe 4 the day before a game? By the time we go to the Euros or World Cup or a major tournament, can we get into that 6 grams per kilo bracket, which it is a lot easier to do when you're mixing solids, liquids, gels, desserts, you know, being smart about having juices in and around meal times a day before the game. So yeah, it's been quite an eye-opener, I think, over the last couple of years, seeing that. And now I work in rugby as well. I see it with the female rugby players at club level. You know, they're just scared. They're worried about what happens if I overconsume. And it's actually reframing the mentality. Like, you're fueling for performance so that you can win the game tomorrow.
I think that's a big message. And you mentioned a couple of times then the research. Obviously, yeah, the research from what I hear, I'm not an expert on it, but it sounds like there's not enough. What does the research say that women should or need to do compared to men? Is there anything at the moment which is clear on that? Aimee, can you kick us off?
Good question. I wouldn't say anything definitively. Would you, James? Go on.
Well, I mean, the one paper that stands out for me is the Naomi Brinkman's paper, looking at the energy expenditure and dietary intake of pro football players in the Dutch Women's League. And this was a nice paper that came out looking at the energy expenditure and energy intake in Dutch Premier League football players. And similar to what we found at England, was that there is a large energetic cost with the female athletes, and their appreciation and understanding that energy expenditure is high if you're a female athlete, especially if you're a female football player. And what kind of me and Aimee have had this discussion as well, is that if you're a female athlete and you're a professional athlete, you cannot consume the same amount of calories than your best friend does, who is a normal 9 to 5 worker and she's a female. Like, you're an athlete that has to fuel and recover from the demands of your chosen sport. And I've just pulled Naomi's paper up here. So you're looking at total daily energy expenditure of 2,882 plus or minus 300 calories. So ballpark figure, you've got some females there expending 3,000 calories a day. Now, if you said to a female athlete 3,000 calories a day, they'd be like, oh my God, I'm currently consuming 1,800. And that's where that mismatch is between understanding of being a professional female athlete and fueling and recovering properly versus the 1,800 is what your mate consumes and she works 9 to 5 in an office, but you are a pro athlete. So yeah, that's kind of an encouragement there for female athletes to understand if they are competing, training 12 hours a week, and they are an athlete and they're a professional athlete in their chosen sport, you've got a wonderful opportunity to eat a lot of food, but it's not about, oh my God, we're just going to put loads of weight on. It's about, how do I build, repair muscle mass? How do I fuel for the demands of the sport correctly? And how do you ultimately become the best athlete you possibly can in your position in the sport?
Yeah, and I guess just to add on to James's comments, I think a lot of the time that I've found in the past is it's not an intentional restriction. It's just a lack of awareness and often a confidence thing as well. And a prime example would be, a pre-season campaign, 6 to 8 weeks long, and you see females eating the same breakfast every day or having on average the same intake every day. And it's just about educating around today is the hardest day of the week. That breakfast really should not look the same as it does on a rest day. But yeah, it's just having kind of the confidence and kind of the educational nudges around the environment to kind of help them make choices and just grab things that are just in their eye line. That was something that I was very much on the side of when I was at Manchester United, and kind of still the same with rugby, but you've got to kind of be a bit more careful in the sport. But yeah, I think a lot of the time there's just that lack of awareness on, oh my God, like I've done an extra 5K of high intensity running today, plus a gym session. I actually need to eat more food. But that's been the main common theme that I've found is until you explain the whys, and raise awareness, it kind of doesn't change.
And I'm rudely interrupting to make sure you're up to date and aware of the Science of Sport Coach Academy. The Coach Academy is an overgrowing library of sports science courses which are broken down into bite-sized chunks. So if you're enjoying today's podcast and you want to get your hands on some more great sports science information, all you have to do is hit the link in the show notes. You get in there completely for free for the next 7 days. So hit that link in just a few minutes' time. And what kind of research would you then like to see? So, I mean, it's all well and good us sitting here and be like, oh, well, the research isn't what we want it to be. But Aimee, what would you want to see that would really help you as a practitioner be like, right, okay, we're going to nail down A, B, and C?
Yeah, to be honest, I'd like to look at it from maybe a psychological standpoint of maybe the whys behind them not. Is it primarily a fear? Is it and that could be fear of many different things, but feeling heavy, those weight fluctuations can definitely really throw some people. Yeah, so I'd definitely like to look or even study it myself around, that kind of perception of why they don't maybe hydrate as much as they should. Is it because they feel heavy and then that's just a no-go? Or is it now that female sport is on the up, especially female football, is it a perception from social media, and then that has a negative effect on body image perception? So it's kind of that, I could go super deep into it, but yeah, I would like to take a kind of step back and take it away from the training pitch and get to know the whys before then being able to prescribe the 6 grams or whatever we may do.
Absolutely excellent. And James, have you got any other bits and pieces you're like, oh, that would really help if we were to really know the ins and outs of these things to really make a difference for the female athletes you work with?
Yeah, I think just jumping on the back of what Aimee said there, the beautiful thing at the FA at the time of us being able to do that study with the senior women is that it then opened the door for a very good nutritionist and practitioner, Sam McCaffey, to go in there and start working with the lower age groups, with the female age groups at England football. And he's kind of finishing up. Maybe he has finished already, but he's certainly published some awesome papers off the back of his PhD looking at female specific research. And I think touching on what Aimee said there, like, I mean, one of his titles here, Carbohydrate Fear, Skin Fold Targets and Body Image Issues. And that unfortunately is the lay of the land sometimes. And he's certainly got, qualitative data where he's interviewing people and asking them the question that Aimee's asked around, why do you struggle with it? And what people are coming back is, well, yeah, I'm scared of putting weight and I'm scared of being skin fold and told that I'm overweight and then I need to come in and do more in the morning or whatever it might be. And so I think that that's really opened the door for us as practitioners to normalize the education and make sure they're not scared of fueling, and make sure that if there are clubs that are still having these skin fold targets that are on the gym wall and they're out for everyone to see, like, that's probably not encouraging the right behaviors in terms of fueling. And then it's like the catch-22 of, like, you want to put that on the wall, but you've then got players that aren't eating properly because they're worried about weight. And then you're moaning that they can't sustain the demands of the game on the pitch because they're not eating properly. But it all stems from the fear of body comp and skin fold and maybe shaming. So this is a joined up approach between practitioners, nutritionists, sports science staff to actually identify what is the best way of educating the female athletes, and how do we have body composition targets, but they're not driven by fear or we're going to shame people. It's driven by, how do we make you the best football player in the world? And that's certainly something that I enjoy educating both the male and female athletes around. Is I quite often term it this functional mass. Like, how do we make your current frame more functional for your position so that you can be the best player in the world? Now, if you're telling me that you want to be heavier because you can then, in rugby terms, go into contact with more momentum and force, great. Let's target a gain in body weight and let's make it functional. Let's gain skeletal muscle mass. If you're a goalkeeper in football and you actually have identified that you would be better to be 2 kilos lighter so that your counter movement jump is better and your ability to reach the top bins and get those top corner shots, then let's go after a change in becoming more functional by dropping 2 kilos of fat mass. And that should just be a normal conversation between a practitioner and an athlete and members of staff. So yeah, I think probably my summary of all of that is education at this point is so important, and that is what Aimee sees in her day-to-day. It's what I still see in male sport, and certainly what we've both seen with female athletes more than ever. And actually, in my experience, I would say the females almost want to learn about it more. Like, they're more willing, like they're sponges. Like, it's almost like, tell me more and more and more, because some of them have never had it in their career. So it's an exciting opportunity, really.
Yeah, and I guess just to tailgate on the back of that as well, that is kind of where the education can become so important, because access isn't always there for female athletes. Like, yes, things are getting better, but they're definitely not where you would like them to be, and they're not on par with some of the the boys' academies and stuff. So yes, it could be being scared of carbohydrates, but it also could be not actually having access to food. And we all know how important post-session recovery is, but there's a lot of semi-pro football players in the championship and potentially some in the WSL now that may not even get a breakfast or a lunch or something. So then it's down to the athlete to then make a good decision on the way home late at night or whatever it may be. So yeah, I think there's definitely a bigger piece around female athletes. So if we can if we can educate around simple resources and different types of carbohydrates, proteins that they can grab from a service station, for example, on the way home from a game. If they don't have access, then that can be huge.
Absolutely excellent. And when we bring all of this together, right, I'm interested to hear what your guys' like top tips and advice are for female athletes when it comes to optimizing performance nutrition. We talked quite a lot about like the day before, for example, but obviously there's 6 other days in a week, assuming you play once a week. So, like, what are your guys' top tips for female athletes when it comes to fueling for performance and making sure that the differences between males and females are accounted for when it comes to nutrition? So let's go for Aimee first. What are your top tips?
I'd say one of the top tips has got to be when you do need to go higher, like when there is a session where the demand is greater than your average, then the first protocol would be to increase fluid-based calories, fluid-based carbs. So if you're having your standard bowl of porridge of a morning with a banana, can you add a couple of glasses of fruit juices, or can you drink a smoothie on the way to the training ground or wherever it may be? And just starting off with, okay, I may not want to increase my overall volume on a plate, but can we add little bits around it that's not going to make you feel too full or uncomfortable and have that negative association with fueling? So yeah, can we get it in an easier way through fluids? Because one, it'll hydrate you, and 2, it'll provide fuel for the session.
Excellent. James?
Yeah, I think for me, mate, I'm just going to open this up to athletes in general, because with nutrition, certainly in my experience, like, what do the elites do very, very well? And they know what works for them. So they would have tried and tested a number of different fueling strategies leading into games. I've got players that much prefer to drink their fuel, as Aimee's talking about, rather than having like big bowls of porridge before match day on the day of the game. So it's working out, what do I enjoy eating? What does my gut like to have in it pre-game? And then I'm just going to double down on that, and I'm going to refine it and make it even tighter and tighter and tighter to try and achieve the recommended intake, and then become really super consistent with it and do it every single game. And same with recovery, find out what is your preferred way to recover. I've got players that really struggle to eat in that acute window after a game. I've got others that are starving. So we have to provide both options. I've got players that would much rather a smoothie, a shake and a drink. And I've got others that would much rather consume food and eat. So, but again, like, both of them would hit similar macronutrients, but it's them working out, this is what works best for me and allows me to recover properly and then go to sleep and recover overnight correctly. And then I think the other, like I said, it's there becoming really consistent with it. But then also the awareness of like how, and I don't want this to sound like cliche, but how powerful nutrition can be for your sport. If your goal is to improve training adaptation and you want to become stronger, faster, you want to jump higher, you want to recover better, like, nutrition is an unbelievable tool to bring in 5 or 6 days a week, 5 or 6 times a day, to allow those things to happen. You might only do 1 gym session a day, but you'll eat 6 times a day. So straight away, me versus you, I've got 6 more impacts that I can have on my athlete. You might train twice a day. Okay, you can have 2, I'll still have 6. But you get my point. Over the course of the week, you've got multiple opportunities to really develop your game as an athlete. And I think that's what we get really excited about. So that would be another top tip, is like, really get excited about how nutrition can affect your performance as an athlete. I think sleep is really like not done that well by a lot of people. And it is one of the 3 things that I would have at the bottom of the pillar for anybody. It's, strength training and exercise and movement. Then it's like nutrition and food, and then it is sleep, repair and recover. And I think if you get those 3 done very well, you're gonna drastically improve as an athlete. But I can't get over that importance of consistency. Like what I've seen in my experience with like the ultra elites, is that they've worked out what works for them, and then they do it very well every single day, and nothing gets in the way of it. I've got athletes, I know it's not all about a whoop recovery, but I've got players that every single night before a game, they're 100% recovery, because they've figured out what allows them to be in that position so that they can go into every game having 100% recovery. How many athletes do we know that would not be in that position, but they're competing at the top level of sport?
I think that's a big piece of advice as well. Like, if you can, not that one metric is the best thing or the only thing, but it's a way of inspiring people to actually take that seriously, and to make a difference, and to try and work on things which they might not have necessarily been paying attention to before. But before we wrap up, I'm interested to hear what you guys are doing about all of this as well, right? So obviously you've set up a female football nutrition network. What's all that about? And yeah, why is that going to help people? Aimee, kick us off.
Yeah, so I guess this new project of ours is something that is, what's the word I can use? Like hugely, like it's a huge passion. Like I've played football over the years, never had any access to a nutritionist, didn't even know what one was when I was a teenager into like early 20s. And then kind of delve deeper into that world, and then have the ability to impact and help female athletes has been amazing. And then if we think about everything that we just mentioned in terms of education, access, availability, from grassroots up to the elite, there's a real gap out there for us to make a huge impact on a global scale to educate and empower young, well, not even young female footballers, just female footballers in general, to help them improve their performance nutrition.
Excellent.
Anything that you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just, as Aimee said, it first and foremost, it's a passion of ours, which if you haven't got a passion in something, there's no point in doing it. But the big gap that we've seen, Matt, is in female football in particular. If you're working or playing at the top level of the sport for some of the bigger clubs, now what we're seeing is clubs are well resourced, and it's great to see that, and players are becoming more educated, they're becoming more elite, which is superb. But unfortunately, there's still a real big gap in nutrition knowledge, nutrition education, understanding what on earth performance nutrition is, understanding what caffeine is. And, oh, wow, I didn't realize that caffeine could help me during a match, or I didn't realize that I needed a carbohydrate gel during a game, or, you know, a banana at half time. And why is that? Like, that's what we've seen as the gap. I saw it at England football. Aimee's seen it in the WSL. And so we've decided to take action and set up an online global community where we really just want to improve that gap and help football players across the world understand performance nutrition. And the reality is as well, is that it's not just football players, it's parents. Yeah. And that's another big angle that we're going at here, is that if you have got a 17-year-old and she's still playing, or she's still living at home, but playing locally, then actually it's the parents that have this massive gap as well. So yeah, look, the Female Football Nutrition Network is an online community. It's an online network where if you are a female football player across the globe, you can join us in this network, in this community, where we will educate you. We will provide webinars. There'll be podcast links. There'll be research papers. There'll be resources. There'll be examples of how to fuel the day before a game, how to fuel during the game, how to recover after a game. If you are at a certain stage of your menstrual cycle, then this is what you should consider. If you are injured from an ACL or you're recovering from a bone injury, then this is nutritionally what you need to be thinking about. So it will be a real kind of one-stop shop for everything performance nutrition for female football players.
Absolutely excellent. And where's that available? Where can people find that?
At the moment, we're in the building phase. Hopefully by the time this episode launches, then the community will be ready for people to access. But we're aiming for a end of October launch, and there'll be like a soft launch a couple of weeks before that, and then it will be online. I mean, if anyone follows myself or Aimee on socials, then that will be a good starting point. And we also have our own Instagram page, Female Football Nutrition Network, and people can follow that, and they'll be kept up to date on there as well.
Excellent stuff. So before we leave, very quickly, Aimee, where can people find you?
So your best place to find me would be Instagram, and the Instagram handle would be at Committed Nutrition Ltd. And yeah, if anyone would like any more information on the network or just anything around nutrition or just a chat, just drop me a message, and I'll always take time to reply.
Perfect. And James?
Yeah, similar. So LinkedIn, Instagram, Morehen Performance, and then, like I said, we've got the Female Football Nutrition Instagram account as well. So probably those 3 places if people want to chat and have dialogue.
Perfect. So guys, thank you very much for your time and effort today. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to speaking again soon.
Thank you.
Cheers, Matt. Thanks so much.
Cheers. And that's it. Once again, a massive thanks to James and Aimee for all of their hard work on today's podcast. I really appreciate it. I'm sure you do at home too. Before you leave, I want to point you in the direction of the Science of Sport Coach Academy. And the Coach Academy is an overgrowing library of sports science courses which are broken down into bite-sized chunks. So if you enjoyed today's podcast and you want to get your hands on some more great sports science information, all you have to do is hit the link in the show notes. You can get in there completely for free for the next 7 days. So hit that link in just a few minutes' time. And if you have enjoyed today's podcast, it'd be fantastic if you could recommend it to a coach, a colleague, an athlete, or a friend. That means that we can keep bringing you the best possible guests and the best possible content. And that's it. Once again, a massive thanks from me. I'm Matt Solomon of Science of Sport, and I'll speak to you next week.